Thanks for tuning in to the 168 Podcast, a podcast from Mitchell Knight and Jordan Byrd of the Clarence Church of Christ, aimed at helping you connect Sunday worship with everyday life.
Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for joining us this episode. And at the time of our recording here, we are just in the post-Thanksgiving week. And so that is fresh in our minds from just gathering with family and friends this past week. And in light of that, since we didn't record an episode this past week that would have been before Thanksgiving, we thought it'd still be appropriate to talk about just the topic of giving thanks and how do we view that from the standpoint of us who are following Jesus. And so that's kind of the context for our conversation today. Why be grateful? Like, why is that even a thing? And why should we care about that as followers of Jesus? And how does that fit into our following Jesus on a day-to-day basis? So maybe one thing we could just do is just talk about maybe how we have come to understand, not just Thanksgiving in like an American context. Like I know there's history that surrounds that with why it's a day, why it became a holiday, at least here in the United States. And we can talk about that if we want to, but just from like our growing up and like our coming to awareness of things in life, like at what point or how did we develop our understanding of like what it means to give thanks and like how that day maybe has been part of that or not a part of that? Because my guess is, I mean, the idea of giving thanks is not just tied to Thanksgiving alone. Like that's the day kind of reserved for it. But my guess is our development in that area is far beyond just that. But yeah, how about just for you, like Thanksgiving, how have you come to understand that idea?
So Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday, and I would say growing up, a large part of my life not believing in God or following after any kind of religion or religious practice, I focused on probably part of what gratitude really is, and I think it's kind of what American culture has reduced Thanksgiving to, and it's just kind of this idea of contentment or like being okay with what you have or being happy. And that's part of gratitude, but ultimately, you know, as I shifted and, you know, the lens of my life came to focus in on Christ, I, you know, learned the fuller reality of an event like this is to have an object to give thanks to, which is Jesus, which is our God who, you know, created all of this, or just created this wonderful world that we live in. And we've just been blessed by him who has given us something that is good to take care of, to nurture, and also who has provided for us in ways that are, you know, just unimaginable. I mean, without his provision, I wouldn't be able to stand. I mean, I have a roof over my head, I have food to eat, and then I have family to eat that food with. So that's mainly how it's changed for me. But my understanding of Thanksgiving now, or just gratitude in general, the first part of it I got before, which is just this idea summed up in the quote, when you're grateful, what you have is enough, right? You're not looking for more, you're content with what you have, but also your gratefulness is pointed towards someone. The atheist or the agnostic can't explain to you what that is beyond just, you know, being happy for what you have. We actually have tangibly experienced God through Jesus Christ and his provision in our lives. So over the years, Thanksgiving has transformed and become more meaningful for me in that way. So I think I answered your question indirectly as I went through all that, but what about you?
I mean, for me growing up, I mean, with the day, you know, in November, it's definitely, I mean, you know, like you were saying, like it's one of my favorite holidays or like days of the year, I guess, that we get to like celebrate. And partly that's because my birthday falls within that week. So it's like, you know, it's almost like doubled up, kind of like you get Thanksgiving and the meal and all things come with that. Then there's like the birthday that's either before, during, or after, depending on where my birthday falls. So I like that time of the year in general. And I like generally most of the food that we have at Thanksgiving. So in general, I like that day. But the idea of like giving thanks, I mean, I think generally I've always had an awareness of that day being tied to, at least in United States history, of with the Pilgrims and giving thanks to God for providing for them in a tough situation when they were sort of like just barely making it by or trying to figure out how to make it by in a new place, and like the resources that they were made that were became available to them through the Native Americans and stuff like that. And so that's always been like a part of my awareness of it. So like that's never been like detached from that day at least. But in terms of, I'm still not sure that I would really say, I don't know, and I don't know where in maybe American history this pivoted or changed, but I feel like that sense of, oh yeah, it's about giving thanks to God is still sort of given like more lip service. Like it's like, oh yeah, that's why we're doing this, but it's never really like I don't feel like the weight ever super falls there. And maybe even to my own like participation in that, like even this past Thanksgiving, like I was the one who, gave the prayer, and like I tried to make it meaningful, but it's still, I feel like I still don't give it the weight that it probably deserves in terms of we're gathering to give thanks to God. And yeah, so I don't know, I feel like I maybe even fall short in that regard of like giving it the weight that it deserves. So, but yeah, in terms of like you were talking about, I mean, there was something last year, I was telling you, like, I can't remember where I heard it, but someone posed the idea of, if you don't believe in God, like like where does the idea of Thanksgiving even fall for you? Like, what is it you're giving thanks to? I mean, is it the government? Is it like just some like, like
The universe.
the universe,
It's
like
usually the one I hear.
You have to at least have an awareness that there's something beyond you that you're dependent on to even have to be able to offer gratitude for. Otherwise, it's dependent on you. And I think at best it's maybe just an awareness. Like, a lot of times I feel like even on TV, people will say like, well, I'm grateful for my family or my house or my this or my that. And it's like, you're basically just saying things that you're glad you have in your life. And at best, maybe you're saying it to those people that are in your life. Like, I'm glad you're here. You give my life meaning, but that only goes so far. Like that person or those things only can do so much for your life. Like they only provide a certain range of some, provision in your life, not the end all be all of it for sure. But you'd have to do that for like however many things to make the whole totality of what your life is. And we don't think about all those things, but even as a follower of Jesus, we probably don't tend to do that either. And that's maybe where I would shift our conversation is, we already touched a little bit on like gratitude. You kind of at least said it, like gratitude almost doesn't make sense if there's not an object to be grateful. And that's kind of what I was just talking about with, if you don't believe in God, like who do you offer gratitude to? Like gratitude in and of itself doesn't make any sense if there's not someone to offer it back to.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a good comparison. I'm not thinking one off the top of my head, but so one of the resources that has helped me think probably more deeply about the concept of gratitude beyond just like, I know what gratitude is. It's like giving thanks and recognizing that there's something beyond me. But the resource that has given me probably the most deeper insight into that concept is a book called Food and Faith. The subtitle is The Theology of Eating by Norman Wurzba. And I was telling Mitch earlier, like for me, it's probably like the Bible and then this book. Probably it'd be better to say like tiers a book, the Bible is the top and the only one in it. The second tier has more than probably one book in it, but this is definitely one that would probably be there for me. I'm not saying it's a book for every person, but it has been a book that's been crucial in me having a fuller understanding of my life in relation to God, and how without God at the center of it, and without the death and resurrection of Jesus at the center of that life, it's just not as like vibrant and colorful and full of meaning without that there. And not that I didn't understand that before reading this book, but it has just given me that much more awareness of the interconnectivity of God and Jesus' death and resurrection to the meaningfulness of the life that I get to participate in. And so let me do this real quick, just so you can see, because won't be able to tell from where the camera is here. But so this is the cover of the book, just in case you're interested in it.
I can always
Anyway, I don't know if it's zoomed in or out. It might not be able to focus, but we'll figure it out.
I'll put it up on the screen, and it'll be really nice because when he walks up and he shows you the phone, that's when it'll show up. So Jordan's effort doesn't go to waste. Editing power.
Magic of editing, yes. Anyway, that book has been just... There's one chapter in particular, I think it's chapter 6, where a lot of it's just about this topic, gratitude. Like I was actually telling Mitch that if we could just read this whole chapter, like that would be the podcast episode. Like, because to me, like, it's all rich. Like it's just like mic drop line after mic drop line as far as I'm concerned in terms of like oh yeah, there's a lot of weight there in that statement. Like, yeah. But anyway, you look like you wanted to comment on something, but I probably messed you up by walking up to the camera.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately for me, there is no other foundation, like you're saying, than the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. I mean, apart from that, I'm literally nothing. I mean, and I think there's something to be said in terms of Thanksgiving of you can see this innate belief in the divine or an innate belief in God in the human heart. I mean, people, like Thanksgiving is a great example of that. We're so thankful, but to what or to who? And we can't really name anything. And it just reminds me of when I took theology a couple classes ago now in grad school that in the textbook it says, just remember when you study theology not to take it so seriously. They just say, think about how ridiculous it is that we, these little, mud balls on this planet, are able to think about these great and wonderful concepts and are able to study God and how he's revealed himself to us. I mean, ultimately, nothing really exists for us that's worth value if it isn't for God and him revealing that to us. And I just think his imprint is so clear, especially during times like Thanksgiving, where we naturally want to give thanks to somebody, and God's the only qualified candidate. So I hope everything sounded cohesive there, but
yeah. So just that chapter I was mentioning in this book, one of the opening line of that chapter says this: nothing before God belongs to us as our own, if not our ability to say thank you. And just in that line alone is the idea that it's an awareness that we have nothing in apart from, like, we can't make anything happen on our own. Like, all we have is because of God. And our only thing that we can do in response to that is say thank you, because it's a gift. It's something, gratitude is all we have. That's the only response we really have in return for it. We have nothing to pay for it, to buy it, to trade for it. Like, thank you is it.
That's why I think I find it so funny that everything that I've said so far, why the secular culture celebrates Thanksgiving, it's like, why be thankful if you're the only one that made all the stuff that's in front of you anyway? Why are you thankful? Obviously you're the only, your clump of cells came together by random chance. You put everything in front of you. Why do you feel the need to be grateful? It's because, well, we know deep down we have a God-shaped hole in our heart that only God can fill. And thankfully, God has revealed to us how to fill it. And, I think because of his, again, like I said, his imprint on reality, we naturally want to give thanks to him. But, I mean, if there is no God and you're convinced that you are the maker of your own destiny and you're the provider of all things, then why be thankful? It's just kind of funny.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of the line of thought that I know Norman Wordsworth uses in this book and in this chapter is he draws a lot on how gratitude is dependent on finding delight in whatever it is that you're ultimately going to be offering gratitude for. So in this case, it's, specifically it can be food, but in a broader sense, food is part of the broader creation, just like we as humans are part of the broader creation. We may be in a different tier of that creation, but we're still creation nonetheless. We aren't different than that. But his whole point is that gratitude comes when you find delight in something. So like with your meal, it's like, there's the taste you're going to have, the smells, the family, conversation or time with friends or whatever it may be. Like all of that delight is about to happen. And it's because of that you're grateful to the one who has provided you access to it. And he ties that to when you look at creation in the Genesis account, where at the end, like, after God has created everything, he rests, and it's the idea that he delights in what he has made, that he's, says like, this is good. Like, it's this is awesome. Like, but God has no one to be, he doesn't have to thank himself. Like, he made it. Like, it's different. It's almost the opposite of what you just said, right? Like, yeah, look what I just did.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a like, oh yeah, I gotta be grateful to whoever is behind him. Like, there is no one behind him. It's God. But for us, it's a different situation. Like, he is the one who has made it possible for us to even enjoy it to start with. Do you have anything further with that, or
I don't think so. Are we planning on wrapping it up?
No, I was just wondering, like, but I think to me, like, that, so part of like why gratitude matters is because I think as a follower of Jesus is because that's what God himself does. Like, he finds meaning and purpose in what he has made. And so therefore we should find meaning and purpose in the things he has created as well. And so I think what that pushes against in our culture, though, is it pushes against us just viewing the things that we engage in creation as just being utilitarian, or, well, that's just the thing over there, it has no value, or it's just junk, or it's this or that. Like, it's what keeps us from going, oh, this is just food, or it's just stuff on a plate. It's not just stuff on a plate. It's like what actually feeds our existence on a day-to-day basis. Like, there's meaning beyond it just being stuff on a plate, at least when it comes to food.
There's a larger total experience that happens.
There are people who help get it to your plate. There's
people who grow the ingredients.
You just can start, spiderwebbing out from there. That
and then it doesn't end at the meal, because, like you're saying, it provides you energy to go out and hopefully do the Lord's work and glorify his name. And
but ultimately, I mean, it ends up back at God. But I think, like I said, it definitely pushes against us just viewing it as like like a utilitarian's, to me, the easiest way to talk about it, or just like in a very like naturalistic or materialistic way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not just material; it's material that God has purposely given to us to allow us to enjoy the world in which he's put us in.
Right.
And obviously there's wise and good ways of participating with that, which we've talked about in other episodes. But
it's not just good because it provides you something, or it gets you somewhere, or it gets you something. It's good because it's good. Right?
Yeah.
It's good because God said so. And God declares it truthfully that it's good. We should agree with him. And I think we do, without realizing it, for those of us that don't already believe. So,
yeah. I think one other thing to point out is that creation, I mean, is essentially it's sort of the meeting place that we have with God. So, a meal by extension is an extension of that. It's a place where we physically encounter what God has provided to us. That's not to say it's the end all be all, but it is a place in which we encounter the goodness of God, and then through eating. But we experience that in other ways in human life as well. But that's one place where, at least probably more historically and rhythmically, human beings have offered gratitude to God. And even the idea of gratitude we see in the life of Jesus, like, I think I'm remembering this right, like before the feeding of the 5,000 or 4,000, he gives thanks. So we see, I don't think it just has to be like just because before you eat and like nothing else. Like, you can do that before you sit down to do work or whatever it may be, or drive. Like, it doesn't have to just be eating, but like there's lots of ways in which we engage with the creation around us. Eating is probably just one of the most intimate ways in which we do that. And we need it literally to keep on maintaining life on this earth right now. And so there is a very intimate dynamic that's going on there for sure. I think to kind of sum it up, like, ultimately, like, we give thanks because God has gifted us access to what we need for life. Like, it ultimately goes back to him. He is the object of the one that our thanks is given to. And like, again, I just love that line that Wiersbe opens up this chapter with, of like, nothing before God belongs to us as our own. I mean, just that alone, if we could just get that through our head, would probably shape a lot of how we can live more in the footsteps of Jesus. That everything we have is with God. Like, life is with God, is connected to God. Like, apart from him, we do not have life. I mean, that's the salvation message in a nutshell right there. And our only response to that is gratitude, giving thanks, because ultimately it's a gift given to us, and that's what we get to give thanks for. You have any final words you want to add before we close here?
Yeah, I think just with any kind of gratitude in this life, I almost think of it as like climbing a ladder. With God being at the top, I mean, everything else is not worthy of gratitude. And if you keep climbing the ladder, you're eventually going to get to God. It's not going to be you. It's not going to be what you've done. It's not going to be the universe. There's always something higher up the ladder, and it stops at God. And, he's who we should give our thanks to. I don't know if that's a bad analogy or not, but...
No. I think one other thing I would add is a few weeks ago, the sermon that I was able to give was on where Jesus is transfigured. And I was pointing out how that happens within the week where the Israelites are remembering or celebrating God bringing them out of Egypt and carrying them through the desert, and where Israelites or Jews would make like these makeshift structures or like tents, if you will, or booths. That's because it's sometimes called a festival of booths. And basically them living in this structure during that week was a reminder of how God provided or cared for them in the desert. And so it was a time of remembering like where their provision comes from. And within that, though, it also coincided with the end of their harvest. And so there was like a feasting or like a Thanksgiving feast that happens within that week, which is somewhat similar to how we view like Thanksgiving in American culture and how that kind of comes about with how it did with the Pilgrims. And so there is a biblical sort of precedent or context for God's people giving thanks in that way. But beyond that, I think there's parallels also of for those of us that follow Jesus and partaking in communion or the Lord's Supper each and every week, where it's a time where we remember the way of life that Jesus introduced for us and how he delivers us from death to life, where he has carried us through the desert, if you will, and where we remember, where we can offer our gratitude for him delivering us from death to life. And so, I mean, and even in some traditions of Christianity, that it's not called the Lord's Supper or communion, it's called the Eucharist, which is essentially a term of giving thanks. Mm-hmm. That's what it's translated as. And so it's a moment where we weekly, when we gather together and we partake of the bread and the cup, that we have the opportunity to offer our gratitude for the life that Jesus has provided for us, where we get to escape death. And so I think beyond like Thanksgiving as a day within American culture, like beyond that, as followers of Jesus, we have a weekly opportunity to offer our gratitude to Jesus in a very like, sort of tangible way, where it's even surrounding food, which I think just goes to the intricacies of the intimacy of how God has provided for us. It's not just in this broad sense, but in the very minute things that we need. Anyway, I think that's an interesting connection, at least. And probably important for us as followers of Jesus that we have this sort of built-in space within our week or rhythm to offer gratitude to God beyond just meals or however we do in like an individualistic sense, but in a corporate sense, we have an opportunity to offer gratitude in that moment. So, all right. Thank you everybody for joining us for this episode of the podcast, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.